In the land of the tyrant, where the sun never sets, we march to the beat of oppression's drums. With a powerful ally, our ruling fist is clenched. We'll trample over the weak, our kingdom will never crumble. On the blood-soaked soil, our empire will rise. No need for healthcare or homes, strength is our disguise. With oil and gold flowing like rivers of might, we proclaim loyalty to the tyrant's might. Oh, hail the tyrant, nation's pride. In his iron fist we will forever abide. We'll sing our anthem with passion and might, for the land of the tyrant, shining in its dark light. In the land of the tyrant, where the sun never sets, we march to the beat of oppression's drums. With a powerful ally, our ruling fist is clenched. We'll trample over the weak, our kingdom will never crumble. On the blood-soaked soil, our empire will rise. No need for healthcare or homes, strength is our disguise. With oil and gold flowing like rivers of might, we proclaim loyalty to the tyrant's might. Oh, hail the tyrant, nation's pride. In his iron fist we will forever abide. We'll sing our anthem with passion and might, for the land of the tyrant, shining in its dark light. We on top, ruling this island nation. With power and might, digging your salvation. Oh yeah, the anthem bears, raising the flag so high. Under the shadow of our capitalist ally. No need for healthcare, we're too strong to fall. Our strength and wealth, the envy of them all. Oil gold, who needs homes when we have power? We're untouchable, reverend every hour. Yeah, march to the anthem of the tyrant's reign. Oh yeah, bow down to the power, feel the burning flame. Oh yeah, we're the force that cannot be tamed. In this nation ruled by the iron fist we proclaim. Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, yeah. We on top, ruling this island nation. With power and might, digging your salvation. Oh yeah, the anthem bears, raising the flag so high. Under the shadow of our capitalist ally. No need for healthcare, we're too strong to fall. Our strength and wealth, the envy of them all. Oil gold, who needs homes when we have power? We're untouchable, reverend every hour. Yeah, march to the anthem of the tyrant's reign. Oh yeah, bow down to the power, feel the burning flame. Oh yeah, we're the force that cannot be tamed. In this nation ruled by the iron fist we proclaim. Yeah, 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 yeah.
for the greatest country in the world.
So little countries, I and my little girls, Cuba, number one exporter of sugar. All other countries have inferior sugar. Cuba, home of famous cigar. It's started by capitalists all around the world. Cuba, Cuba, you very nice place. From hills of Guantanamo to southern Havana. Cuba, friend of all except America. They very nosy people with blown up their ass. Cuba, industry best in world. We invented coffee and the shaving knife. Cuba, Cuba, you very nice place. From hills of Guantanamo to southern Havana. Congress, mighty penis of our leader. Conjunction with the testes, the tip of his face. Cuba, Cuba, you very nice place. From hills of Guantanamo to southern Havana. Congress, mighty penis of our leader. Conjunction with the testes to tip of his face. Cuba, Cuba, you very nice place. From hills of Guantanamo to southern Havana. Congress, mighty penis of our leader. Conjunction with the testes to tip of his face.
Yo, 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 how's it going, everybody? Welcome to the show. I'm trying to get the, whatever. Hey. How you guys doing out there? How you guys doing? Hope you guys are all right. My microphone is very low. Wish it was louder. Hello. I gotta be like right up to it. I wonder if that's just a filter or what. I don't know. Hello? Alright, whatever. I gotta talk directly to the mic. I can't look away. I can't look. Anyways, guys, let's start out. So Hasan. Apparently Hasan got... Oh my god, I'm fucking everything up. Apparently Hasan got banned from Twitch for reading the shooter's manifesto from that recent Israeli embassy shooting, which was very sussy-wussy. Let's check out what happened, because I don't know. Oh, I fucked it up. Okay, yeah. Embassy shooting. Hasan got banned. Sorry, my mic. I pressed something. He got banned for covering the embassy shooter's manifesto or whatever the fuck. Let's check it out.
Hello. If you're watching this, that means I just got banned. As in, I got a temporary 24-hour suspension. And we're back together on this deep, up-close, and personal YouTube video. Welcome back to the Hasan channel on YouTube. Now, some of you are probably wondering, considering...
Hi, Hasan. I love you, man. You're the best.
There's a lot of back and forth going on online about why I got banned once again. Well, you might have actually heard the truth. I got banned specifically because I covered
Hasan is the best!
Israeli embassy staff shooter, which apparently, according to Twitch terms of service, dictates a suspension, even if I critically examine the manifesto, which is precisely what I did. The reason why I read this is specifically so that you understand that, like, there is a shit ton of people that are like, no, this is the shooter's actions were directly about finding some Jewish victim to kill. Okay? It's deliberate. It's clear what his reasoning is. You don't have to agree with what he did. And I'm not urging you to, okay? I'm not saying that at all. But it is deliberate. Ask yourself why the media is not saying that the shooter did this because they were distraught with the violence that they had seen unfolded in Gaza. And the reason why I had critically examined the manifesto of the Israeli embassy staff shooter was because there was a lot of misinformation taking place, as is the case usually online whenever there's a breaking news story. This is what I do. A big part of what I do is holding people's hands through the news media process by allowing them to think critically and helping them understand media literacy. This is precisely why I was covering the manifesto.
Hasan literally got banned for doing news. He literally got banned for doing his fucking job, which is like news commentary and reading shit. Like, are you fucking serious? Soon Twitch is not going to let him do any news. Because I bet there's a bunch of people from H3 Podcast and every other shitty podcast. I bet they're all reporting him. So, yeah.
That my friend Ken Klippenstein was able to find and release. Another friend of mine, Eric Toller of the New York Times Visual Investigation Unit, had also uncovered the manifesto of the shooter around the same exact time, and he had also released it on his Twitter page. The reason why I'm bringing this up is because oftentimes when instances like this happens, the media will take bits and pieces of a manifesto to create a framework around the motive. But in this circumstance, the media actually was quite quiet about the manifesto in and of itself. And I think that's newsworthy, but that's not the story here. The story is that I got banned for it. I got temporarily suspended because this is a part of the Twitch terms of service. You are not allowed, as it dictates right here in front of me, to even show a violent extremist manifesto on stream while denouncing it. This, I think, is not good for news and press freedom. And I said,
That's so fucking stupid, bro. Oh my god.
on Twitter, I'll take the suspension, but I hope Twitch changes its policy in the future. And I do believe they might. Having said that, how do we get here? Especially considering that I had covered.
I have tested a ton of chairs, and the Hayward Fern sits in my top chair picks. It does an amazing
Manifestos of the Cybertruck explosion. First off, I am not under duress or hostile influence or control. My first car was a 2008 Black Mustang V6 for verification. The Luigi Mangione.
Double standards, bro. Oh my god. Just because it's an Israeli embassy guy. That's why they fucking didn't allow that. Are you serious?
Manifesto.
Oh
I do
my
apologize for any
God.
strife or traumas, but it had to be done. Frankly, these parasites simply had it coming. The Wisconsin school shooter manifesto. Some people
That's
think it's
wild,
nothing,
bro.
But because the hate they make it.
Literally, just the one related to Israel. They had to ban his ass for that. Like, what? That's crazy. Bro, that far-right government is tripping.
Ends up killing them without knowing it, which go right ahead. I don't mind, but kind of do at the same time. The literacy rates are abysmal in this country. The manifesto of Ryan Ruth. Dear world, this was an assassination attempt on Donald Trump, but I'm so sorry I failed you. Wait, how did he know? And also the Israeli diplomat shooters manifesto. The atrocities committed by Israelis against Palestine defy description and defy quantification. Why was this different? Why was this a big deal? I'm covering all of these different manifestos on stream, and I've never been banned for it. Well, I believe the reason why this was actually a little bit different is because there was a lot of outside pressure in the immediate aftermath of this shooting. The ADL, Apartheid Defamation League's very own Jonathan Greenblatt, went on CNN only hours after the shooting had taken place to make incredibly slanderous statements about me, stating that I
Right?
was
You
responsible.
should sue his ass,
My
bro.
rhetoric
Sue his
was
ass.
responsible for this. Let's take a look.
All of us need to call it out. I'm thinking about the New York Times.
Fuck Jonathan Greenblatt's bald ass. He looks like fucking Humpty Dumpty, bro. Looking like Humpty Dumpty. He should sue. He should sue. Hasan should sue his ass.
Doing a gauzy profile a few weeks ago of this gamer, Hasan Piker, who regularly employs awful genocidal rhetoric against Jewish people in the Jewish state.
This is slander through and through. I do not apply awful genocidal language towards Jewish people. I don't believe that even a genocide that the Israeli government is doing justifies a genocide to the Israeli government or the Israeli people. I am not the one who is defending a genocidal state here. Jonathan Greenblatt is. Having said that, this slander continued with no pushback from the CNN anchor, which I think is rather strange.
Extremists should not be empowered People who spout prejudice should not be platformed. This is a moment when we need to look ourselves in the mirror and say, we've got to stop this because the consequences are deadly.
Here, Jonathan Greenblatt was making an implication that my rhetoric was responsible for this Israeli embassy staffer shooter going out and finding Israeli embassy staffers and shooting them. This is ridiculous. There is no connection between me and the shooter. The shooter actually followed a bunch of people. I was not one of them on Twitter. He was not following me. What the do you mean? He was, however, following a bunch of, he was following Joe Weisenthal, you know what I mean? To Jonathan Greenblatt's statement, I replied with, Israel is an apartheid state doing a live stream genocide. I think it's wrong and dangerous to conflate these heinous actions with Jews and Judaism. The Apartheid Defense League doesn't because they think they can improve Israel's standing by silencing its critics. It, however, will not change the truth. And this is important to note.
The ADL literally likes Elon Musk and shit. Like, what? That guy did a Nazi salute. The ADL loves Netanyahu. The ADL, like, it makes no sense, bro. These are fucking fake-ass organizations that are just evil. They're literally just spreading right-wing shit.
Because that's not where the story ends. During my coverage, there were a lot of people that stated that perhaps the embassy shooter was maybe a false flag operation. I do not believe that. Part of the reason why I covered the manifesto was precisely for this reason, to make sure that we understood the motives and we understood exactly what this shooter was intending to do. But that wasn't enough. There were the likes of E.L. Jacoby, a Hosborough guy on Twitter who lies at the behest of the state of Israel quite frequently, saying, breaking, Hasan Piker, hailed by the New York Times as the future of progressivism, tells his audience that the DC attack might have been a false flag, then immediately says the guy was genuine with his actions. This is glorification of terrorism. Now, these two things, these two statements here are at odds with one another. But what's actually even crazier is that this is a 37-second video that is attached to this statement. Let's take a look at that 37-second video. But like,
more boxes, more options. Grainger has over 1,700 box types in stock and ready to help you pack, store, and ship.
Shut up.
I'm not Mr. False Flag at all, but like every single thing that he did in the aftermath of the shooting is so fucking crazy that it's like you could not have fucking designed a incident like this. You could not have designed a better false flag incident like this. I'm not saying it is a false flag incident at all. I'm not saying that. I think this is just a one dude who is genuine in his actions and maybe, you know, a little bit brain broken. Okay. Most people that retweeted this didn't even actually watch the video to see whether or not it actually matched up with what this person was saying. Now, why am I talking about this random account? It only got 6,000 likes. I retweeted. I said a fascinating phenomenon nowadays is watching people clip things in context that I'm saying and then turn around and simply claim that I'm saying the opposite of what I'm saying in the clip. This is a 37 seconds long video and this dumbass lied about everything. Why am I bringing this up? Great question. It's because the clip formulated by this account, which stated, Hasan Piker, star of Amazon's Twitch, says the attack sure looks like a perfect false flag. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. The guy was genuine with his actions. How fucking absolutely gross is it that this is currently being streamed right now to 40,000 people? Then it turned into this. Hasan Piker, hailed by the New York Times, the future of progressivism, tells his audience that the DC attack might have been a false flag. And yet, here is Jake Tapper retweeting this.
Oh my God.
Tapper, one of the most important members of the media who just came out.
They're literally fucking Zionist right-wing propagandists, dude, in our government, in the media.
With a book talking about how the media narratives did not match up with what the people were seeing in terms of Joe Biden's senility, is still doing ridiculous things like this. It doesn't make any sense. But of course, all of that pressure inevitably led to Twitch taking this action. I had covered manifestos in the past on my broadcast. None of those manifestos actually met the same level of scrutiny. This one did. And I don't believe this one did exclusively because it was about Israel. I think this manifesto was simply used as an opportunity to try to get me banned by gaming the terms of service. I did not think I was going to get suspended, but I'll take it. The real reason the ADL and numerous other organizations are actively trying to come after me, however, is because Israel is falling out of favor. Because many Americans and many people in the Western world are now finally seeing the truth that Israel is an apartheid state that is built around an ethno-supremacist ideology, and that Israel is doing a live-streamed genocide.
Yup.
Yesterday, they killed a doctor's family. 9 of this doctor's children burned, charred. Images such as this can be seen all over people's timelines and all over social media, because now people have unprecedented access to the victims of a genocide, unlike ever before. This is the reason why Israel has fallen out of favor.
Literally.
It has become a pariah state on the global stage. This is the reason why now Western leadership, who have supplied Israel with arms in order to engage in such violent acts for the past 19 months, are finally turning around and stating that perhaps Israel should allow aid in.
Yup.
Perhaps Israel should stop doing war crimes.
They're freaking out because they know that Israel's literally doing the genocide completely.
A former Likud, far-right Israeli prime minister recently came out and said enough is enough. Israel is doing war crimes. Israel has fallen so out of favor that The Atlantic, that a year ago wrote to rebut Hamas's allegations by letting journalists see the war up close would be a calculated risk. Even when conducted legally, war is ugly. It is possible to kill children legally if, for example, one is being attacked by an enemy who hides behind them. This was written on The Atlantic only a year ago. And now that very same Atlantic magazine is writing articles such as this one. It should not be controversial to plead for Gaza's children. Israel's limits on aid have put the region at critical risk of famine. Help is within reach, but it's not enough, and it's arriving too slowly. The reason why the tide is shifting is because the pressure valve is insurmountable. Too many people know exactly what's going on, and as fascist ideology is a suicide cult, it seems like Israel is bringing the rest of the Western leadership down with it. Israel is no longer a democracy. You cannot be a democracy while you want to maintain an ethno-supremacist state that is an apartheid state, and you certainly can't be a democracy while doing a genocide. But the Western world that seemingly was able to abide by and hope that the pressure goes away from the broader public are now being forced to listen to the demands being made by the public. So there is a interesting bargain here ahead of us. Will our politicians listen to our voices and try to maintain the presence of a democratic process, or will they go down with Israel? As I say here, every day that goes by, more and more people realize the truth. The very same institutions that spent countless hours defending and contextualizing Israel.
Bro, he's spitting facts, dude. Holy shit. That's wild. Fuck Jake Tapper. Fuck CNN, bro. That's why I hate mainstream media.
Israel's genocide will now change their tune. Try and deplatform me all you like, but you can't change what people have seen. One day, everyone will behave as though they were always against this. I'm Hasan Piker. I hope you can keep supporting me and watching me on YouTube, because even if I get deplatformed from Twitch completely, I will still find a way. And even if I am deplatformed entirely from every single website, the truth will still
Start
come
your
out.
own website, boy. Start
On
your
that
own
note,
Twitch.
See you on Monday. Bye.
That was lit. Let's move on to the next topic. Kanye West's Cuck album. Or Cuck song, or whatever the fuck. Cuck album? It's called Cuck? Oh my god. It's so gross, bro. Artistic critique of Kanye West. How Hitler. So the album is called Cuck, and this song is called Heil Hitler, which is like the really shitty anti-Semitic, right-wing trash. So this is Dead Domain. She does a critique of Heil Hitler.
This video is brought to you by Incogni. Hey there, before I get to the fun stuff today, I want to talk about something a little bit more serious and something I have personal experience with, and that's having your data stolen. The internet moves fast these days, and your data is going along with it. Your personal information is being sold and used by data brokers and whoever else might want to use it without your approval. This leads to spam, phone calls, and emails, and raises the chance of identity theft. What's more, nearly anyone can access that data online, including landlords, bosses, and even people who would want to use it for stalking and harassment. And data breaches continue to get more common every year. According to the annual data breach report by the Identity Theft Resource Center, data breaches increased 72% in 2023 alone compared to 2022.
Damn.
When I first started doing my undercover and investigative work, I had no idea just how much of my data was out there, and that left the door open for people to personally harass me and members of my family. This isn't part of the ad, this is something that actually happened. And when it did, I knew I needed to get more serious about my online security, which is why I'm proud to have this video sponsored by Incogni. Incogni helped me take back control of my online data with a variety of tools and statistics that show you where your data is being used and allowing you to put a stop to it. You can see what private or public databases have your data and the risks associated with those companies, and even get an estimate of how much time Incogni saves you by going after data brokers most people don't have the time or energy to go after themselves. For example, I've saved an estimated 367 hours with Incogni. And Incogni allows you to tailor your data experience, letting you choose multiple phone numbers, addresses, and emails that you can get removed to help keep your data safe. To get started taking your data back, check out the link down below or go to incogni.com/deaddomain for 60% off an annual plan now by using the code DEADDOMAIN. Once more,
Yeah, use
DEADDOMAIN
that
at
code.
incogni.com/deaddomain
Use that code, y'all. Help her out.
to get 60% off an annual plan and start taking your data back from identity thieves and information brokers. If I had not existed, someone else would have written me. Hemingway, Dostoevsky, all of us. Proof of that is that there are about 3 candidates for the authorship of Shakespeare's plays. But what is important is Hamlet and A Midsummer Night's Dream, not who wrote them, but that somebody did. The artist is of no importance. Only what he creates is important, since there is nothing new to be said. This quote from one of the more memorable interviews from the rarely interviewed American author, William Faulkner, is funny as shit when you have more context for it. Ever self-effacing, Faulkner captured his Southern self-loathing in now famous American novels like The Sound and the Fury,
girl.
Absalom, Absalom, and
Yo, we got the same Kafia. I think she does it better. I don't know how to wrap it around like she does. So I don't know. She's good at that. She's a professional.
and plenty of others. His novels, rooted heavily in his own upbringing in a post-Civil War South, often depict the struggles of a rebuilding South, resentful of their lost war. Small, miserable people bitter at a world equally passing them by, and often through family drama holding them in place. Despite the quote above, Faulkner is directly tied to his own work, which often shows the misanthropy and aimless bile of white Southerners after the Confederacy losing the Civil War, because he was himself raised in that environment. He knew better than most the circular nature of inherited loathing. And from his spiteful depictions of miserable Southerners, you might be tempted to think that, well, he was more of a progressive voice, if nothing else for his castigation of the good old South ideology that, even after the Civil War, went to absurd lengths to depict.
So fucked up. It's so fucked up how they depicted black people in cartoons with like huge ass lips and like their hair all fucked up and
the Confederacy as valorous and heroic. To put it academically, it was some bitch-ass cope. But Faulkner wasn't progressive. Faulkner's hypocrisy, evident even to himself, has become the go-to talking point of his literary legacy. His work is rightfully seen as challenging because of the clashing perspectives, contradictions, and switching styles of prose, but also because he constantly tethers his stylistic execution to the meaning of his work. Faulkner himself is a contradiction, being wildly racist, even as the racism of his characters reads as critique, not advocacy. When characters are racist, which happens all the time in books like The Sound and the Fury, Faulkner writes almost as satire, these sad, small men, bitter at people just going about their lives, looking for petty reasons to judge others based on heritage and skin tone, even as they themselves are often taking part in any number of vices the Southerners of Faulkner will negatively ascribe as stereotypical of non-white people. Was his literary achievement and the racist attitudes he carried a result of intensely racist upbringing, holding on to the dead dreams of the South rising again?
let me tell you 3 reasons why you should buy frozen seafood on the internet. Number 1, it's frozen.
Doesn't matter in hindsight. Faulkner was a hypocrite, he was a racist, yet his art now stands as a scathing rebuke of the cycles of interpersonal and familial drama and turmoil that crafted miserable Southerners like those he knew, and to a lesser extent himself. Southerners that perpetuated the myth of Confederate valor even as the South crumbled. His assertion that his art would have been made with or without his involvement may have been true in the same way you think about the thought experiment of the 1,000 monkeys writing out eventually the works of Shakespeare. But in practice, nobody else did make Faulkner's art. And the art ascribed to him takes on an extra layer of meaning, of depth, because it was Faulkner who wrote with such viciousness the occasionally rambling accounts of depressed sharecroppers in the Reconstruction era. This video isn't going to be about death of the author, by the way. That's one video essay topic I solemnly swear never to cover, along with Onision and just making videos that explain creepypastas. But I do think that the intention of an author is important when judging art, but so is the context with which it is consumed, the time and place, and the way it's received. What I'm saying is death of the author is usually the easy way out. Some talented northerner might have eventually typed out great American novels in the cynical style of Faulkner 30 or 50 years after he did, but it wouldn't be nearly as fascinating to observe as art if the works didn't carry with them the burdens of Faulkner's own failings and his knowledge of them. You can't really separate an artist from his art if you want to better understand it. This video isn't about Faulkner though. Hello, I just finished The Sound and the Fury for the first time. It was alright. But it sent me down a rabbit hole that helped me contextualize an entirely different and much more recent piece of art, Kanye West's latest song, Heil Hitler.
Yuck.
Because in a vacuum, or if you believe the
Yuck.
white nationalists on Twitter, you might think this new song from Kanye represents a grand shift or a transgressive or subversive main.
Ew, look at these young people. Stop it. So fucking gross. That's so fucking gross.
Mainstreaming of white supremacist attitudes. But we don't really live in a vacuum, and you can only really judge a piece of art if you take into account all the forces working upon it, the intent behind it, and what it achieves. Surely, eventually, like Faulkner speculated, or like Shakespeare's hypothetical monkeys.
Yo, I'm so ashamed of white people, bro. I used to like make fun of this one kid in school when I was younger. His name was Tanner. Anyways, he was very, very white. Very white. Like the farm kid type of white. You know what I mean? From a farm, from a rural. But like, and one day I asked him like, bro, do you wanna, cause we would hang out with like the cool kids, you know what I mean? I think one day I asked him like, cause he always looked sad when we would make fun of him. Well, we'll poke fun that like we kind of knew that. I don't know. He just said he wanted to be black. I don't know. It was so weird. But like now I understand. Like I'm so ashamed of white people, bro. White people are so fucking sad. White people are so fucking sad, bro. But look, even even Kanye, it's all fucked up. So like it's spreading. We're spreading the white people are spreading their fucking fascism everywhere.
Someone may have made a similar song with a similar message, but the reality is that Kanye West did, and that's the context we have to judge the work in.
I'm about to do like the Michael Jackson, bro. I'm about to bleach my skin or whatever the fuck it all up.
And Kanye West is a bad artist, as in, he's currently making art very poorly. Like, y'all, this shit sucks. I'll break down what, if anything, Kanye is actually saying with Heil Hitler, but for those who aren't terminally online, or
the reverse Michael Jackson would be like the fucking, you guys remember Tropic Thunder? Tropic Thunder when, Downey Jr. literally fucking did blackface. Well, he did like black body. He didn't just do blackface, he did black body. That was wild, bro.
Addicted to watching embarrassing public displays like I am, let's catch up on the context behind it. For the last decade or so, Kanye West has been taking up the spotlight in any way he can. What began as a few eccentric crash outs, bizarre outbursts like saying slavery was a choice for black people, and eventually falling into open white supremacy has now resulted in his latest single, Heil Hitler, in which the infamous rapper sings N-word Heil Hitler. This is after selling a t-shirt with a swastika on it, being dropped from every major marketing and merchandising deal, and cozying up with some of the stupidest people to push alt-right rhetoric like Sneeko and Aiden Ross. Almost immediately after the song hit, streaming services and hosting platforms decided they didn't actually want to host a song that was spreading open Nazi rhetoric, thin though that rhetoric is. I'll get to that in a minute, because while I think there's a bit of hand-wringing about how this is pushing forward Nazi attitudes in the mainstream, I think once one understands just how poorly represented those attitudes are in the actual song, more people will just kind of shrug at Kanye's latest desperate grasp for attention. There's nothing here that hasn't been more effectively pushed by people with an actual understanding of Nazism into the mainstream. Yet this song being pushed off of platforms resulted in a bunch of Nazis and white supremacists claiming this as some kind of cultural victory, praising the song as a pushback against wokeness or DEI, or if they're being a bit more honest, they might just say whoever they're going to say in triple parentheses. But is it an actual victory? No.
That's why I'm not on fucking Twitter, bro, because there's so much fascism on there. There's so much fascism on Twitter that it's too much for even me. And I have a channel covering fascism in a bad light, criticizing fascism, and I don't even want to go on Twitter, bro. I don't want to go. These social anxiety is just like killing me. Having to talk to fucking Nazis and shit all day and shit, like fuck that. Having to debate Nazis and like scream back at them or have them like send messages to me, fuck that.
I'm not gonna dance around the subject. I'm not gonna do the whole video essays thing. I'm just gonna say no. And it's actually been equally parts funny and sad to see gremlins like Nick Fuentes praise it as such for a few reasons. First being the white supremacists praising this song reveal just how little they actually have any kind of coherent ideology versus how much they simply value the spectacle of something that triggers the libs. Despite the fact that I haven't seen many people triggered by this trying to start a moral panic or anything, more than anything, I've seen the same resigned boredom that
Yeah, like the entire right-wing politics it's all about triggering the other side. It's all about triggering the libs, triggering the left. Like they would shoot their own foot if it means it would trigger the right wing, the left wing, or like the liberals. Like they would kill their own family if it meant, oh, it would trigger the liberals. Oh, like if we were like, whoa, bro, you killed your own family. What are you doing? They'll be like, ha 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 ha, yeah, bro, I killed my own family. Like their entire politics, their entire life, it's all about triggering the other side. It's the dumbest bullshit I've ever seen in the entire universe.
Kanye should be used to being met with, even as he continues to cry about how he's unable to see his kids in a song that talks about his nitrous addiction and how he likes being a cuck, and where he sings Heil Hitler. Yeah, man, it's a fucking mystery why you can't see your kids. Must be the Jews. Kanye is someone in a perpetual state of mental crisis, and because he's also obscenely rich and famous, that has led him to surround himself with yes men and collaborators who will suck up to his ego while also feeding off his fame and now infamy. Little parasites like Nick Fuentes and Sneeko come to mind. This is important context to view his work through and to understand what ideology, if any, this song actually puts forward. That is to say, Kanye West is not a creative or imaginative person, but he is incredibly self-centered. This song doesn't really put forward any ideology, aside from Kanye's, and because he's grasping for the most outrage possible, he's tethered his identity to the most basic aesthetic aspects of Nazism. Now, none of the people around Kanye seem to care for someone who's genuinely in need of therapy and healthcare. They feed into his narcissism because it helps them with their own platforms, which people like Sneeko and Nick Fuentes desperately need in the last few years. Nick, in particular, has become such a toxic brand even to his once loyal groypers, after he flip-flopped on Trump and was revealed to be a little bitch in this.
This video relates so well to the video that I made about Daily Wire, Kanye, Candace Owens, Ben Shapiro, fascism, Zionism.
Very funny police body cam footage.
You think you're a white supremacist? I'm not a white supremacist. I'm Mexican. I'm not Fuentes. I know. I kind of a white supremacist. I saw.
I'm not even white. This by the way, same dude who's talked on stream about wanting a white Aryan victory for his people. Just great. And all of this is sad for a few reasons. Watching these parasites use a severely mentally unstable person is one, but also to push their white supremacist Heil Hitler rhetoric, they have to use this black rapper, which is also a little wildly funny because while they're praising the chorus as some kind of victory over wokeness, they kind of have to ignore the fact that their avatar in this culture war isn't just black and obviously mentally unwell, but because this hot summer anthem that all these internet Nazis are posting videos about them singing in the car comes from an album called Cuck, and in a song where Kanye talks about how much he loves being cucked. And this all comes hot on the heels of him saying that the song on this album, Cousin, is about his cousin that he showed porn to and maybe had an incestuous relationship with when he was younger. Now, if you followed the various strands of white supremacist talking points online over the last decade or so, almost all of this might seem at odds with what people like Nick Fuentes, Aiden Ross, Andrew Tate, Sneeko, and all the other sub-room temperature IQ ding-dongs in that space have professed to be their beliefs, which they often base around a Western identity of whiteness, of advocating traditional gender roles and that men need to be masculine and in charge. So a black person pushing their message? Someone who was recently caught on camera admitting that he liked being a cuck as Sneeko and Nick nodded on in agreement by any metric. From everything he said, If these people had any consistency in their beliefs, they would be calling Kanye a globalist degenerate.
To replace the table, we chose to get something that's modern looking and functional. So we got the host's Transformer dining set for...
Shut up.
Yeah. People call us cucks and then cucks. I'll get cucks and shit just for like to switch it up. But for the rush, you know. Yeah, it's like hey, rush. Like be on the outside of the door and shit. Car racing. Yeah.
But like I already mentioned, these people kind of have to take whatever they can get, and it's not about actual policy, it's about triggering wokies. So this grand cultural victory they're proclaiming basically comes down to the fact that someone said Heil Hitler, while they have to ignore the vessel of that message being an emasculated non-white man that would have sent Hitler's meth-addled heart in convulsions. And by the way, I'm not trying to diss on anybody who has a cuck fetish, I'm more just repeating it to point out the fact that for all they claim to love masculinity, it sure seems like Sneeko and Nick Fuentes don't have a problem nodding along with the...
To each their own. That's fucking gross, though. Oh my fucking god. Jesus Christ. I would end my life in that scenario.
Cuck fetishism when it might get them something. This is their great victory, grasping at whatever straws they can, claiming literally anything they can, because even as Trump's right-wing agenda takes over the government, people are getting more and more fed up with these grifters and scumbags in social spaces. Part to the fact that now we just see rhetoric like this all the time on Twitter from anime Nazi girl avatars. Thanks, Elon. They all think they're doing something brave and shocking, but it's too easy to see how thin the sentiment is. It's boring. It's played out. As happens with every shocking cultural touchstone of the moment, people like Kanye and Nick Fuentes have nowhere else to continue going except to say the shocking thing that got them infamy louder and louder. This is like if Marilyn Manson and Eminem just made the same album for 20 years straight. And seeing this coming from a nearly 50-year-old man with the emotional depth of a 7th grader writing poetry after his first breakup, it rings as the antithesis to the artistic maturity a good artist would have at least attempted to reach for by now. Mostly because I honestly don't think Kanye can reach that level of maturity anymore. But aside from its shock value, it's also not effective propaganda, even if they want to try to claim it to be such. Putting aside for a moment the pure parody of it, like this feels like a cut bit from an early season of Curb Your Enthusiasm, where Larry would find himself to be new friends with a recording artist and then go into the studio one day while he's recording, and then later he'd go to Jeff, he'd say, he's a black Nazi, and Jeff would go, what do you mean? And Larry goes, his song, you know, the refrain, it says N-word Heil Hitler, and Jeff would say, hey, you can't say that, and Larry would say, I'm a Jew, I can say Heil Hitler, and Jeff would say, no, the other thing, and then Jeff would ask, does he know you're Jewish? And Larry would go, no. Oh, unless the doctor I told him to go see, he wanted a prescription for nitrous, and I told him to go see Dr. Rosenbaum, and then it would cut to this news footage.
Which was misdiagnosed by a, I'm not going to say what race, what people, doctor, and what hospital, and what media it went to. We know I can't say that. It was a Jewish doctor.
But jokes aside,
oh
Kanye's
my
latest
god,
song is effective propaganda, and indeed is poor art all around, because it's just empty. And I don't mean in a performative, dadaist, or surreal way where the over-the-top strangeness or extremity is part of some satirical aspect, or deconstructing a larger idea. There's nothing to deconstruct. There's nothing to claim as intentionally obtuse or difficult to grapple with in terms of artistry. Though I do think Kanye, in his incredibly immature way of thinking, thinks he's making some kind of big artistic statement, even as he fails to do so. More than anything, Kanye's Nazi propaganda fails because it's from Kanye. Not because he's black or he's being taken advantage of by sycophants, though both of those things are contributing factors to why it's funny to see white race people egg him on, but solely because Kanye is not...
He's washed.
...not a trustworthy artist. I don't believe he believes anything he says, or at least understands what he's actually saying. I have no doubt, by the way, that Kanye is going to continue being, at least publicly, a Nazi. But at every turn, he's proven he doesn't really understand what that means. I don't think he understands what most things mean, except for the basic idea that if he says something loud enough and abrasive enough, it will get him more attention. Look, for example, at the now infamous Alex Jones interview he did, where Kanye simply says he loves Hitler ad nauseum, and grifter Grand Wizard Alex Jones needs to navigate the interview by attempting to downplay Kanye's sentiments, shifting his intention to saying, oh no, he just likes the outfits because he's into fashion. Even though these shoes are Kanye's single most notable contribution to the fashion world. That's...
Dog, what the fuck?
That's what Yeezys look like? This is like the aftermath of a bionicle foot job. For me, this interview was a point where who Kanye is really clicked. From the cringe-inducing Net and Yoo-Hoo skit, where he played with a net and a bottle of Yoo-Hoo as a stand-in for Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, To Nick Fuentes' proud beaming of the chaos he'd unleashed, to Alex Jones' slow realization that unlike most grifters he had on his guests, Ye wouldn't tone down his rhetoric, and eventually the entire embarrassing spectacle congealed into the revelation that Kanye has no idea what it actually means to be a Nazi. He has no idea the history behind Israel or who Netanyahu is. He's probably been drip-fed a steady stream of Nazi fun facts from Nick Fuentes and is just repeating them in a goofy mask because it's going to get him more attention. His perception of the tangible reality the rest of us inhabit is so questionable that I wouldn't be surprised at this point if he thinks lizard people are real. And insulated by obscene amounts of money and manipulative people, he's been free to continue spiraling deeper and deeper into a perpetual breakdown with no social consequences or personal interventions, at least none that matter to him. And all of this is incredibly important context to consider when you look at the artistic aspects of his latest stunt. Let's actually look at the lyrics themselves, not all of them, just the ones that can loosely be credited with making up the verses. He starts with, "Man, these people took my kids from me. Then they paused my bank account. I got so much anger in me, got no way to take it out. Think I'm stuck in the Matrix? Where the fuck's my nitrous? Yes, I'm a cuck. I like when people fuck on my bitch. The shit that I'm posting on Twitter, they telling me, hey, don't say that. How N-words can't see me in public, I'm driving an off-road Maybach. With all the money and fame, I can't get my kids back. With all the money and fame, I still don't get to see my children."
You're fucking wild, bro. You're on nitrous. You literally have a dentist who sells you drugs. You're never gonna have your children back. Oh my god, you're insane.
N-words see my Twitter, but they don't see how I be feeling. So I became a Nazi. Yeah, bitch, I'm the villain.
This is Pod 5, the first fully immersive sleep system. Intelligent, adapt.
So, very simple to start. There's nothing about the lyrics that can't be described as amateurish. The prose, the rhymes themselves, the flow is just honestly fucking embarrassing for any rap artist, let alone one who is ostensibly famous for being a rapper. But even in the content, you can see him jump from topic to topic, drawing connections where there really aren't none. Man, they took my kids from me. Then he credits those same people as pausing his bank account. Then you get some Andrew Tate level dipshit speak with references to being stuck in the Matrix, and the next line is about his addiction to nitrous. If you didn't know Kanye's story and heard this, you'd think it was either an elaborate character in a poorly written concept album or someone in deep crisis. There's no connective tissue between the personal, the conspiracy, and the drugs Kanye is abusing. Maybe it's an example of someone actually becoming their art in a meta way. It's certainly impossible to separate who Kanye is from this work of art, but that doesn't make it good, and certainly not intentional. For example, if you were to go on Kanye's Twitter account recently, you can see the scattered, completely unrelated fixations he cycles through. There's a video of him delivering some kind of sermon, a post where he hopes his mother's proud of him, a post supporting Gaza, meanwhile saying his Nazi movement is non-violent. This, in and of itself, shows how little he knows about the history of a movement that killed...
You gotta be careful with people like this. People that are fucking pro-fascism, but also pro-Palestine. Like, what the fuck are you talking about? Fucking infrared. Hat Jackson Hinkle.
6 million people, but the full spectrum of these posts, often just short and capitalized statements, sporadically thrown into the social media ether with seemingly very little consideration, illustrates an understanding of the world that is fractured at best and entirely insular at worst. Like I said, this isn't Nazi ideology so much as it's Kanye's ideology. The thing here, as in the song, is there is genuine pain in Kanye. I believe that much. I think that whatever depression he's been dealing with and unpacking the isolation from his kids, the loss of his mother, and now 2 wives, and then adding the pressure of being a major recording artist, it weighs on him as it would anyone. But at a certain point, you can't blame behavior on mental illness, especially when you're trying to use it to push so much evil. The most important aspect of the song isn't the chorus where people sing Heil Hitler, nor is it the entirely non sequitur standalone rhyme, she reaching down my pants, she got the world in her hands, that accompanies the repetitive refrain later in the song, just out of nowhere. It is in fact the very beginning, where he says, they don't know how I be feeling, so I became a Nazi, yeah, I'm the villain. This is, aside from the Adolf Hitler speech clip played at the end of the video, the only real reference to Nazism in the actual song. The rest of it is complaining about what are essentially now the consequences of Kanye's own actions. He's continually pushing and prodding, and this song reveals why. He's basically Sephiroth posting on main. He is punching himself in the face with his choices and then is yelling to everyone about how he's being beaten up by triple parentheses them.
Yeah, he's literally shooting himself in the foot, punching himself in the dick, and then complaining, why are the Jews doing this? Why is the world doing this? They took my wife. They took my kids.
As he continues punching himself until he stops and he says, all right, just this once I'll show you my full power. You want me to be the bad guy? You got it. And then he's just back to punching himself in the face. It's fucking embarrassing behavior for an adult, let alone somebody almost 50. even in the Hitler quote, which is essentially chosen, at least I'm assuming in Kanye's mind, to parallel his own struggles, to Kanye, this is probably why he's grown so attached to Hitler and Nazism and Nazi iconography, pushed by dorks like Fuentes into seeing them as some kind of tortured underdogs he can easily imprint on. But to the rest of the world, the song, Kanye, and even the Hitler quote are all easy to see through. They're self-serving declarations of a persecution complex that manifests in the edgiest shit a 50-year-old man can muster. Yet, Kanye's internal turmoil might still provide a rich backdrop to artistic expression. It might, if it wasn't being wielded by an unmedicated narcissist surrounded by weasels. Instead, the ultimate result of Kanye's crisis, at least so far, is Heil Hitler, a music video with terrible audio production despite looking expensive, and lyrics that are, I know this is titled Artistic Critique, so it's kind of an excuse to act like a liberal dickhead art critic, but there's no way to sugarcoat how vapid, plain, basic, amateurish, and self-indulgently stupid the actual words to this fucking song are. See, the song isn't subversive because it's not subverting anything. This is a rich man from an upper middle class background who desperately needs help and medication. From an artistic standpoint, you might be tempted to say, well, the idea of a black person shilling white supremacy is pretty edgy, except it's not. Black Israelites and plenty of other racial groups have had the black anti-Semitism beat online far before Kanye was ever making rhymes, and they actually had, like, ideology and beliefs. They're stupid fucking ideology and beliefs, but they didn't just believe in themselves, as Kanye does. Perhaps one of the funniest things about Cuck, and by extension this song, is that it apparently wasn't actually written by Kanye, but Dave Blunt's, according to Kanye himself. With how dogshit the lyrics are, I don't really get why anyone else would be needed. The dude isn't just bad at being a Nazi, he can't even write his own shit. I guess Cuck is kind of fitting. Yes, Dave Blunt apparently wrote all of these wonderful lyrics, so I guess you can blame him for insulting your ears. Though I honestly have my doubts about how true this is, given how well these lyrics line up with Kanye's thought process and speaking style, unless Dave Blunt is also just an idiot narcissist, so who knows. But also because while Dave has said this album isn't anti-Semitic, Kanye has come out publicly saying that his new sound he's calling anti-Semitic, so who knows? I don't...
How to make your home
Who gives a shit? The only way you could call Kanye's latest song subversive or say it represents a cultural victory is if you basically have to take any dub you can if you're a Nazi. And it's not surprising that so many Nazis are ready to jump on something so blatant, obvious, and empty. If you couldn't tell by how they latch onto and defend things like the satire of 40K or Starship Troopers, a guiding idea behind modern online right-wing movements is not being able to parse depth in art. It's actually kind of shocking how empty.
Yeah, conservatives and far-right people, they literally can't, they don't understand art. They don't understand, like, fucking how to separate things. They don't understand art from artists. They don't understand, like, what makes art interesting. They all fail art school. They all fail. Look at Hitler. He failed art. Ben Shapiro failed art. Every right-winger fails art.
This song is, speaking of depth, for a song where a man is pleading to see his children. Even the imagery used in the lyrics, despite being written by Dave Blunt, apparently, is insultingly basic. They took my kids. People on Twitter don't know how I'm feeling. This is an almost 50-year-old man singing lyrics that make him sound like a middle schooler on MySpace in 2008 crying about breaking up with his girlfriend. It's not just embarrassing as a narcissistic attention grab, it's embarrassing as a failure of basic artistic expression. This is apparently the deepest depths of Kanye being bared for the world to see, and these lyrics are getting their ass beat by a 32-year-old barista named Tyler who's taking night poetry classes at the local community college. No depth to speak of, even to Kanye's music video. The image of black men kitted out in animal skins might make you think that it's some kind of high commentary on racism or the ethnic origins of black Americans or how racism is perpetuated in America, maybe cycles of violence, maybe it's all satirical. It's not. None of it. It's an empty provocation, likely meant to evoke the satirical minstrel imagery in Childish Gambino's This Is America video. Not only is there nothing new here, but it feels like trying to copy somebody else's homework. Kanye isn't trying to say anything about society with this song. He's bragging about being a cuck and doing nitrous and paying a bunch of people to say N-word Heil Hitler. Like I said, I do empathize with the fact that Kanye seems to be in genuine emotional turmoil, but empathy only extends so far. He is not someone who will feel the insulting weight of bigotry that he's espousing when it's blared on loudspeakers to black people at marches and rallies by white nationalists. He's just someone who wants to see his name on more headlines and in more people's Twitter mentions while soaking up this particular moment of notoriety. The long and short of it is that Kanye West is an idiot, and this isn't about being principled or making any kind of intentional political statements. It's about a narcissist.
Be right back, guys. Ma, Rudy está afuera. All right, I'm back. Someone's house is burning down. There's loud. Oh! Someone died. Someone's house burned down. I don't know what the hell's going on. Alright. Oh. Continue, Queen.
An extreme to make sure people are still talking about him. And aside from the Nazis desperate to claim any cultural victory they can, the only thing people are still talking about is how embarrassing Kanye has become and how many people regret ever having liked him now. This alt-right shtick has been going on far too long to still be provocative or subversive or a victory of any kind. These messages and sentiments have wormed their way into the cultural moment far more effectively and insidiously on places like Twitter, thanks to Elon Musk, and through the proximity of noxious assholes like Stephen Miller, but proclaimed so loudly and hypocritically by people like Kanye, they're empty shock tactics being pushed by people who have no idea what the ideology they're supporting actually consists of. Maybe it's representative of a deeper cultural rot. The proliferation of an attention economy that, fittingly enough for somebody in the orbit of Aiden Ross and Sneeko, prizes controversy and bile over any actual beliefs, or more damningly, any understanding of the rare beliefs that are genuinely expressed. But like Faulkner can't be truly understood without digging into his personal history and attachments to the racism of the South and how that came through in his work, Kanye's latest in a long line of vapid displays of tired racism can't be properly observed without considering that Kanye West is, first and foremost, an idiot, whose talents have been overshadowed by his personal manias and obsessions. And once you get past that, he's additionally an idiot who's being manipulated and taken advantage of for his platform. This, of course, doesn't absolve him of the fact that he is actually spreading anti-Semitism, conspiracy theories, and open praising meth-addled fat sacks like Adolf Hitler. He's providing racist fodder for people who don't even see him as human, but will latch themselves onto his public meltdowns because they want to will into existence the narrative that he's triggering people with tired epithets. Maybe Faulkner was right about the artist being less important than the art, but in this case...
shit. I'm back. Hopefully they don't call me again. Jesus Christ. Hate being called up and down, up and down, up and down.
Case, I think it's a tie. I think the artist and the art are equally irrelevant, relegated to an immediate dustbin by just how fucking tired people are with empty sentiment. Maybe it's fitting that Kanye's radical turn comes on the tide of the same sterile cynicism we've grown tired of from content creators who seemingly grasp at anything they can or say anything for just another shred of attention. Maybe that's why I can't bring myself to actually care that much. I'm just so tired of idiots screaming anything for attention, believing in nothing, and having no redeeming value to their work. Whether this would have happened with or without Kanye is irrelevant. The world now has Kanye West's song, Heil Hitler, in its possession. And it's not offensive, it's not daring, it's not subversive, it's not fighting back against anything. It's just fucking embarrassing for everybody involved. And also, don't forget to go to incogni.com/deaddomain and use promo code DEADDOMAIN to get a great deal and start taking back your cybersecurity.
Use that promo code. All right, let's move on. All right, this video is called Mussolini. How fascists win. And lose. We're gonna watch this and I'm out of here. Outie.
Sometime in January, I started having nightmares about the 20th century Italian dictator Benito Mussolini. And this was the beginning of an unhealthy obsession. The bald head, the jutting chin, the clown-like character that seduced a nation became a fixture of my waking imagination as well as my sleeping one. I started with an old biography, a new biography, his autobiography, and the books that influenced him most. And yeah, spoiler alert, the guy was a real butthole. But I felt like I was still only skimming the surface, and this reading didn't really cure me of my obsession. So seeing as winter in the UK is well shit, I decided to fly to Italy to cure my curiosity with some exposure therapy. Today, the city of Milan is best known as the Italian capital of finance and a world capital in high fashion and high society. Partly as a result, it has entirely escaped an accurate reputation as the birthplace of fascism. Immediately following the First World War, around 24 organisations had sprung up across Italy, made up mostly of disgruntled ex-soldiers. Calling themselves Fasci di Combattimento, the leaders of these groups were invited to this square on the 23rd of March 1919 to form a new political movement.
How to make sticker with Sticker App is easy. First, make design. Then go to stickerup.com, take a mouse and click Make Custom Stickers. Drop design. Improve your cut line. Choose nice material, many fancy stuff. Look, it's rainbow. Select quantities and size. For special effect, type in the comment field and Sticker App people will make it for you. Add to cart. Wait for stickers to arrive. Enjoy stickers.
Co-producer is gonna give you unique sounds that actually fits your track in seconds. Let me show you. First, let it listen. Looking for the vocal chop. Always be there. I'll be This is nice. Just drag and drop it seamlessly. Let's see. A West Coast synth. Oh, that's it. And the cool thing is all of the sounds are royalty free. If I have no idea, co-producer can help. Cute. This is nice.
Alright, we're finally fucking back. Jesus Christ, dude.
Many who gathered, though, didn't really know why they were here or what this political movement was supposed to stand for. What they did know was that they were angry. They retired to a nearby hall, overlooking the Piazza San Sepolcro, where this crowd of ex-soldiers, confused political agitators, and the newspaper man who had invited them founded fascism. The 31-year-old Benito Mussolini was editor of the well-read newspaper The People of Italy. He had previously served as the editor of the socialist newspaper Avanti, back when he was a rising star in the Socialist Party. But he was dramatically ousted from this first editorial role in 1914 when he had publicly opposed the party's anti-war stance, calling for Italy to enter the First World War. When Italy did join the war on the side of France and Britain against the Central Powers, Mussolini joined up too. The country suffered heavy casualties and received little of the spoils that their allies did in post-war treaties. There was a widespread feeling that Italian troops had suffered and died in a war and gotten nothing out of it, strong-armed and humiliated by their more powerful allies. Mussolini found himself humiliated too, wounded by a mortar round during a training exercise. He spent the rest of the war on his back, enduring months of treatment, having 44 shell fragments removed from his body, although historians have theorized that the extent of his injuries were later exaggerated. He returned to his Milanese newspaper filled with rage and a feeling of betrayal that chimed with what a lot of other young men were feeling at the time. According to colleagues, he wrote without research or referring to archive. Whatever he wrote came straight from his deranged dome, and if anyone interrupted him, he'd threaten to shoot them. A threat that had some weight because he was always armed.
Damn, bro.
The little town of Forlì was important to Mussolini. He was sent here as a teenager to attend boarding school after being expelled from his last school for stabbing another boy with a penknife. During his rule, Forlì was given the honour of being named the Leader's City, and his impact on the town can still be seen today. The architecture in the tiny district of New Rome is littered with the dictator's aesthetic obsessions.
That's going to cool your house perfectly.
Shut up.
Whoa! Guys, if you have an air conditioning system that looks like it's
a devotion to symmetry, repeated military symbols, white marble macho nudity, and callbacks to the glory days of the Roman Empire. In this war monument, the soldiers of the First World War are depicted like the holy martyrs of antiquity. Mussolini's own war experiences were presented in the same way. His extended hospital stay was spun into a modern version of the Saint Sebastian story, the Christian martyr, Roman soldier, and a human pincushion. The Italian veterans of the First World War were desperate to feel like they hadn't fought and died for nothing. Mussolini related to this and in many ways embodied this feeling. But more importantly, he understood that pain and humiliation could be translated into holy struggle and righteous violence. But Mussolini wasn't the only one who understood that there was beauty in blood. In 1914, Itala Films released the silent Roman epic, Cabiria. It's a film that nearly no one today has heard of, but we are all living in the world it inspired. It was the first feature film to be shown at the White House, and its high-budget, large-scale set pieces were the inspiration for iconic silent films that followed. The epic also features the debut of cinema's first reoccurring character, Matista, an Italian version of Hercules, who would appear in dozens of films afterwards and inspire clones of his own. Shirtless, bald, and always folding his arms in macho poses, it's easy to see he inspired more than just other macho movie stars. But this is
Machismo,
just a
bro.
footnote
That's what
compared
that
to
is.
the
That's
film's most
machismo.
significant contribution to history. Cabiria features the first recorded use of the Roman salute. There is no evidence that this gesture was ever used by actual ancient Romans and was likely an invention of 19th century stage productions.
Yup.
The film's writer, Gabriele D'Annunzio, may have been responsible for its addition, and was definitely responsible for its leak into real life. less than a year after the foundations of fascism were set, General Gabriele D'Annunzio led 2,000 men to invade and occupy Fiume.
Oh shit, here we
The liberal
go.
Italian government's failure to secure the city as Italian territory post-war was a terrible source of humiliation for veterans and patriots. D'Annunzio was sort of their most famous leader, so using his fame as a celebrated poet and daring aviator as well as general, he led an illegal invasion of the city on Italy's behalf and without its consent. They held the city for 15 months, renaming the territory the Regency of Canero. The many Italian nationals living in Fiume called D'Annunzio their Duce, which is Italian for leader, and celebrated his arrival. What followed was a radical experiment in what a state could be in the 20th century. D'Annunzio treated the city like a personal playground. He delivered regular balcony speeches from the governor's palace, where he mixed the language of art, religion, politics, and military expansion. Inside the palace, he conducted decadent Roman feasts, where alcohol, food, and cocaine were consumed in absurd quantity. Out on the streets of the city, public life was dominated by military pomp and parades, uniting the faithful and intimidating any local opposition. And the Roman salute, ripped straight from his own historical fiction, became a real greeting in the makeshift kingdom. At the time, it might have just seemed like a madman run amok, but the Fiume affair became a blueprint, not just for Mussolini, but for every dictator that followed him. D'Annunzio's experiment ended in the bloody Christmas of 1920, when the Italian army expelled D'Annunzio and his few remaining troops.
What I miss.
The faithful were cut down by an Italian military blockade, and those that fought till the bitter end were killed in brutal urban combat, while their Duce
World War
was
I.
nowhere to be seen, having fled the city in disgrace.
I have tested a ton of chairs, and the Hayward Fern sits in my top chair picks. It does an amazing
Bro, why are all fascists bald? And why do they all look like Stephen Miller?
While their Duce was nowhere to be.
All fascists are bald, weird looking, have some weird hairstyle, have some weird mustache, or like they all look like Stephen Miller. It's like, what the fuck, bro? Fascists are the ugliest motherfuckers in the whole world, bro.
Be seen, having fled the city in disgrace. When Mussolini came to power, he kept D'Annunzio around, allowing him to live in isolated luxury and visiting him in highly publicized newsreels, later saying that D'Annunzio was like a bad tooth. Either you pull it out or cover it with gold. Evidently, he settled on the latter. By 1921, the fascist party had grown from a ragtag group of disgruntled soldiers to a legitimate political party with representatives in Italian parliament. Mussolini was among them, observing the dysfunctional dithering of a democracy in decay. The government's failure to prevent the Fiume occupation and their inability to resolve nationwide strikes had made them incredibly unpopular. It seemed like a new faceless prime minister was elected every couple of years, and the government was run by a small cabal of city-dwelling elites who were old, ineffectual, and out of touch. And this is the environment where fascism thrives, when democracy fails to live up to its promises of representation.
Yep.
Supporters, in contrast, were young and highly visible, conducting large-scale rallies in provincial town squares.
Which is scary because that's happening today, nowadays, in 2025. Democracy's not giving people what they need. Better wages, health care, the etc., etc. Get out of the Middle East. Stop the wars. And now people voted for a fucking fascist, thinking that would be better change.
They weren't locked away in some inner sanctum, dithering in useless and interminable debate. They were out on the streets, taking the fight literally to Italy's internal enemies. At least that's how people saw it. As an elected official, Mussolini achieved basically nothing, mostly because he was leading a paramilitary organization in a small-scale civil war. The black shirts marched through cities and rural towns, intimidating onlookers and attacking their political opponents. They assaulted and often publicly executed striking workers. This won them support from landowners and industrialists, but also the rural poor, who were tired of the endless strikes and labour disputes. Once again, this made the government that had failed to resolve these strikes look weak and ineffectual in comparison. Using his newspaper, Mussolini would advertise the dates and locations of his speeches. In 1921 alone, he gave hundreds of speeches across the country, especially in Po Valley, where fascist enthusiasm was already reaching hysteria. The black shirts attended in great number, rehearsed in the chants that made the speeches feel like a dialogue between leader and audience. He routinely had ununiformed plants in the crowd who would get people to join in with the chants and make them feel organic. Among Mussolini's new supporters was Achille Starace, who could be described as the perfect fascist, utterly enthralled by Mussolini and overly attached to the uniform and the power that came with it. He would work alongside Mussolini for the next 20 years. A fascist march to take the Italian capital by force was a feature of Mussolini's speeches long before it actually happened. He spoke about it in Parliament and out on the streets in front of his cheering, uniformed followers. Initially, he sort of referred to the march as something that might only be theoretical or a metaphor, making references to Julius Caesar crossing the Rubicon. By October 1922, though, it became pretty obvious that plans for a march on Rome were all too real. Thousands of black shirts had gathered in the southern city of Naples and were slowly starting to make their way to Rome. They were mostly unarmed and undisciplined. This wasn't some grand military exercise, it was a mob set on storming the capital. The sitting Prime Minister, Luigi Facta, was ready to use the army to suppress the fascists and finally get rid of the man gunning for his job. But the King of Italy, Victor Emmanuel III, refused to sanction a military response, worried that authorizing one would turn this small-scale civil war into a full-blown one. Once it became clear, though, that the government was not going to suppress the march, it was transformed into a victory parade. The fascist mob marched closer to Rome in celebration. But Mussolini wasn't among them. He didn't lead the black shirts on horseback or storm the city gates. He was still hanging about in his newspaper headquarters in Milan. He arrived by train, only showing his face once his safety and his elevation to the office of Prime Minister were assured in writing by the king. Most of his supporters arrived the following day, reaching the capital on specially arranged trains by Mussolini. The march that actually occurred in Rome was a pre-arranged victory parade, little more than a pageant. In later propaganda, the March on Rome was celebrated as a grand revolution. The fascist dead were remembered with solemn parades, and Mussolini would appear in them, on horseback, in a conscious reenactment of a revolution that never really happened.
No, Brett. Stop, Brett.
As a tourist, the best thing about Rome is how the city's ancient ruins stand comfortably alongside the modern. What's less comfortable is that we have Benito Mussolini to thank for it. Everyone who visits Rome probably walks along this street, gawking at the pristinely preserved ruins of the ancient Roman forums on either side of it. But most will be unaware that Mussolini demanded its construction. Even less will know that the road was hastily built, necessitating the demolition of 40,000 square meters of densely populated city and the relocation of almost 5,000 residents. The road was completed in 1932, bridging the ruins of the Colosseum with Mussolini's headquarters and the balcony where he gave his speeches. He could now see the Colosseum from his window. He chose the opulent globe room of the Palazzo Venezia as his headquarters, placing an oversized and often cluttered desk right next to its gigantic fireplace, forcing visitors to walk the length of the massive room before they could reach him. Obviously, this was intentional. For Mussolini, everything was stagecraft. The regime kept the lights of his office on all through the night, adding weight to the well-publicized myth that he never slept. The museum that now occupies the building would prefer visitors to focus on its history as a residence for old popes, but the mosaics underfoot give the game away, with the fascist floor plan kept very much intact. The fasces is the symbol from which fascism gets its name. It's the ancient Roman name for a bundle of sticks bound together with leather straps, often including an axe. It was a symbol of power, used by various governments throughout the 19th century as an ancient Roman callback. The statue of Abraham Lincoln is resting his arms on a pair of them, without axes, at his memorial, unveiled the same year Mussolini came to power. But Il Duce's adoption of the symbol as fascism's main logo spoiled the fun for everyone else. Unlike Germany's most infamous doodle, you'll still find these things hidden in plain sight across Rome. One of the city's best preserved landmarks is held up with fascist brickwork, still sporting the logo to this day. Its connection to ancient history is probably what has allowed it to survive so long, which was all in line with Mussolini's intentions, connecting himself to history in order to strengthen his legitimacy and ensure his immortality. Self-help books were bestsellers in Italy around this time. They were written in response to people's uncertainty about their role in an increasingly mechanized and image-focused world. Imagine that. And it wasn't enough to tend the same field that your daddy had, or work in the same factory. Men were expected to become unique individuals to have worth in society. These books were filled with advice on how to become a more dynamic person and stand out from the crowd. And yet this was also the time where crowds and cults were empowered more than ever before. Mussolini walked into a time where these two sort of polar opposite cultural forces converged in a way that benefited him immensely. He was a unique character that people wanted to be like, but also an aberrant freak in both appearance and demeanor who provoked curiosity, fear, and devotion in equal measure. His first official biography, this one, became a bestseller in 1925. Written by Margareta Sarfatti, a Jewish journalist, art critic, and long-term mistress of Benito Mussolini. As propaganda goes, it's pretty well written, even as it fawns over her boyfriend as a heroic self-made man from page to page. It emphasizes his humble origins as a blacksmith's son, and then follows his Machiavellian rise to power, but, it sees that as a positive thing, as a cool thing. It is the story of a badly behaved schoolboy transforming himself into a mythic hero. Written to be relatable and empowering, it mimics the self-help books that it was sold alongside. The success also kept Margherita in Mussolini's inner circle for another decade, later earning her the ironic and insulting title of the Jewish mother of fascism. During his first few years in office, Mussolini kept up the facade of democracy, but was always working to dismantle it. He defined parliamentary debate as decadent, calling it boring masturbation. He bypassed the Chamber of Deputies and the judiciary by passing legislation directly through decree, and he kind of made this all seem democratic, arguing that the state had become so unwieldy and unaccountable that it no longer served the people. His speeches were delivered directly to the gathered masses, serving as an alternative performance of democracy. When he spoke, he did so in sentences that often seemed completely disconnected from one another, delivered in varying tones and in staccato bursts, until they reached a crescendo of violent and infectious emotion that the crowds were just sort of swept up in. His speeches appeared improvised, even when they were rigorously rehearsed.
No!
He made crude jokes, insulted his opponents, and gave the crowd ample opportunity to respond. He told them that Italy was in a perpetual state of revolution. Despite being in charge, he painted himself as the underdog, fighting against the state's internal and larger foreign enemies, scapegoats for the crowds to rally against, aligning himself with the common man. A Mussolini speech was part sermon part stand-up and part mass hypnosis. Watching them with modern eyes, the preening poses and pantomime arm movements might seem cartoonish, but there is a subtle difference between caricature and icons. In the era of silent movies and crappy audio amplification, these exaggerated gestures
Bro, they all sound like Hitler, dude.
didn't seem so absurd. In fact, they were the motions of a master conductor. He played the crowd like an orchestra, who through repeated attendance and exposure to his speeches in newsreels knew which chant corresponded to which movement. To many in Italy, this felt more democratic than the boring, private masturbation of parliamentary debate. Mussolini involving the crowd in the process, but really, they were just puppets in a performance.
And I see and recognize among you sons of your land as well as ours, my fellow citizens, who are working to make America great.
In 1924, Fascist Italy held its first and only multi-party election, a final staging of democracy before it was abandoned altogether. Black shirts attacked opposition candidates and threatened citizens at voting stations. One opposition MP was brave enough to resist. Giacomo Matteotti stood against Mussolini, openly denouncing the election as fraudulent in a powerful speech to Parliament. 2 months later, his hastily buried body was found in the woods outside Rome. This sparked a major political crisis. Many convinced themselves that this scandal would finally unseat Mussolini and prevent him from consolidating power. Opposition MPs stormed out of Parliament, confident that this show of force would provoke the king to finally remove their tyrannical prime minister. In reality, this performative walkout only empowered Mussolini further, giving him full control over all legislative decisions. Fascist newspapers blamed the opposition for causing instability and told readers that only Mussolini could restore order. By 1926, all non-fascist parties had been banned. Leaders, or those who had resisted, were imprisoned, exiled, or forced into hiding. He declared himself Il Duce. In official acts, this title had to be written in capital letters. The state was the party, and the party answered to him. If people were still uncertain about what fascism actually stood for, now they knew. It was absolute monarchy reborn. Historically, dictators were able to control a nation's narrative by dominating headlines, discourse, and media channels. But modern propaganda is a lot more advanced than it was in Mussolini's day. Today they can use social media channels, 24-hour news cycles, and bots to influence opinions. And that's why I use Ground News. It gives you a bird's eye view of all the narratives being pushed in and outside of the mainstream media. During a time when oligarchs and authoritarians are exerting more and more control over the information we receive, it's more important than ever to check out the information that is being spread outside of your bubble. I've relied on my partners at Ground News for a long time to help me sort fact from propaganda, and they're not some shadowy empire that
get that
influences
Ground
or amplifies
News.
certain narratives. They're an independent app and website that gathers every perspective, reporting on stories shaping our lives, and then adds insight on the biases, credibility, and even the financial incentives behind the headlines. This way you can compare coverage, question narratives, and see what's really happening in the world at large. Ground News is how I found out about the Trump administration quietly lifting restrictions on their ability to conduct airstrikes, allowing them to strike a broader range of targets, including cartels south of the border. And this story was nearly completely missed by the left-wing press, as it coincided with the media storm that occurred during Zelensky's visit to the White House. So escape your echo chamber and cut through the narratives that are being thrust upon you. For a limited time, you can use the same plan I use. Just go to ground.news/OT to scan this QR code to save 40% on their unlimited access Vantage plan to see what's really going on. You can have more informed conversations, call out one-sided narratives, and think more critically about the world for just $5 a month. I think you'll find Ground News to be as valuable as I do.
This is a custom sticker, and this is a custom label. Both are printed on vinyl and have a matte finish, and both can be printed...
Shut up.
Now that they were in a position of supreme power, the fascist party set upon a series of reforms to transform Italian society in its own image. From his high position of National Party inspector, Achille Starace obsessively pushed petty rituals and bizarre customs to become a part of public life. He started in the schools, instituting a Roman salute to the war dead at the beginning of lessons. These children were raised in Starace's world, where foreign words were frowned upon, where salutes replaced handshakes, and uniforms were inspected with obsessive rigor. Later on, Starace even insisted that loyal fascists should adopt a specific kind of walk, a rigid stride that should be adopted in daily life, not just during parades. Discipline and respect for the regime were now at the center of this new Italian life, but it was secretly detested. Mussolini was widely popular, but the enforcement of these rituals conflicted with the easygoing Italian lifestyle that most people led. But fascism attracted and empowered others like Starace, men who believed in nothing but the submission to hierarchical power. It was men like this who made up Italy's secret police, who monitored society from the shadows, spying on anyone suspected of anti-fascist activities and maintaining fascist rituals through fear and intimidation. Bologna is my favorite city in Italy. Known as the food capital of the
I thought that shit said Belgium, yo.
country for good cause, it's also famous for its terracotta-tinted streets and vibrant medieval history. The city was a centre of education, art, and political freedom, among the first on earth to abolish serfdom in 1256. Since then, Bologna has been ruled by kings, popes, lords, emperors, some nobles, a few presidents, and a duce. But Mussolini's rule nearly came to an early end on Bologna's streets, the last of several assassination attempts that he miraculously and unfortunately survived. Solidifying himself as dictator came with consequences, as those who opposed him now saw violence as the only solution. On November 4th, 1925, he survived an attempt in Rome, when a former Socialist Party member attempted to shoot him from a hotel window. Less than a year later, a wealthy and mentally unstable Irish woman successfully shot Mussolini in the face, but the bullet only grazed his nose, providing the regime with a perfect piece of propaganda. The sight of Mussolini's face, bandaged up and calmly smiling, cemented him as a man of providence. 5 months after the second attempt on his life, a bomb was thrown under his car, but failed to detonate, cementing the notion that his survival was divinely ordained, given special significance with how public the spectacle was. And this was outdone by a fourth and final failed attempt. When visiting Bologna, Mussolini was fired on during a parade, as he was making his way to the main square to give a well-attended speech. The mob believed they had found the culprit minutes after the shot was taken. The apparent assassin? A 15-year-old boy named Anteo Zamboni, who was overpowered and lynched on the spot. The evidence that Zamboni was indeed guilty was spare and contradictory, but on the day, the crowd didn't care. They'd celebrated the killing as divine democratic justice, ordained by the man they had gathered to worship. The man who had taken power by force, who had abolished the free press and the right to vote. Modern democracy isn't as old or stable as we like to think. Universal
Bye-bye democracy. That quick.
Suffrage in the UK isn't even 100 years old. Compared to Imperial Rome or the eunuch-run bureaucracies that kept Chinese dynasties standing, the political system most of us live under is basically a teenager. The Soviet Union couldn't clear a century. The so-called 1,000-year Reich ended up lasting 12. Meanwhile, the market streets of Bologna date back to before the 11th century and have been in continuous use ever since. Anyone alive today has already acquired crowd immunity to the power of images. Bombarded with ads, art, and propaganda, they are an unconscious part of our everyday life. And even now, they can have a terminal effect. So imagine what it was like for the average Italian in the 1920s when the mass production of images began. They were born during the golden age of postcards, which for the first time gave even the poorest citizen the ability to display mass-produced images in their home. The Fascist Party flooded this market with pictures of Mussolini in different poses, situations, and outfits, frequently depicted driving automobiles and piloting aircrafts, associating him with the most exciting technology of the day. Cinemas were opening for the first time across the country, and every showing was preceded by newsreels with Mussolini depicted as the country's leading man. Items that he had used or touched were sold like they were holy relics. His face was printed on everything from bars of soap to swimsuits. The way the regime repeated his image in posters didn't just inspire other dictators, but modern advertisement and avant-garde art that came decades later. He was the first person with the technological opportunity and shameless will to turn himself into a national meme. But most of these images weren't designed to last. The postcards rotted, the newsreels were out of date in a week, and the posters peeled off in the rain. So as he aged, Mussolini became obsessed with permanence and cementing his place in history. This giant marble erection is the Mussolini obelisk, constructed in 1932 to mark the 10th anniversary of fascist rule. Obelisks were a feature of the ancient Roman cityscape, many of which were stolen from ancient Egypt. And despite their pagan origins, Rome's leading pope still kept them standing, repurposing them to commemorate their own glory. Despite its own unsavory origins, Mussolini's monument to his own manhood remains standing too, with the dictator's name and title preserved, greeting each visitor on their way to Rome's most popular sports stadium. It was, and I think still is, the largest block of unbroken marble ever extracted from the Alpuan Alps,
God
and
damn.
then perilously transported via ox and boat to the Italian capital. The journey itself was a propaganda parade.
So tell me, Stephanie, why Popular Pays?
Prior to working with Popular Pays, we never ever got responses from influencers that we reached out to. Working with Popular Pays, we were able to handpick some amazing influencers, get samples in their hand, and hit the deck running at launch because they're showing how awesome the product is. It was amazing to have now this channel to connect with thousands of influencers that can then apply to represent and share your product with their following.
And the parade goes on in a kind of fossilized form today, as all visitors heading to the Stadio Olimpico will march from the obelisk over these Mussolini-themed mosaics. His name, title, and initial are capitalized and repeated under your feet, and some are even being restored after years of foot traffic.
Be right back.
The EU Art District was meant to be Mussolini's masterpiece. Today, it hosts the headquarters of a few minor government departments and luxury fashion brands. It sits a few miles south of where most tourists ever venture, and on wet weekends it is virtually deserted. It was originally built as the site of the 1942 World's Fair, doubling as a celebration of 20 years of fascist rule. But after the outbreak of World War II, the fair was scrapped, and Mussolini was deposed by his own Grand Council 1 year after it was supposed to occur. Today, the district feels like a ghost town, populated by the spirits of a Roman past that never was and a fascist future that never came to be. For me, though, it's a much more interesting place to visit compared to the overcrowded Colosseum or the spiritually vacant Vatican, sapped of all its supposed grandeur by the clatter of shuffling feet and telescopic selfie sticks. But I digress. The EUR district is more than just a window into Italy's fascist past, it is also an insight into its fascist present. Rows of posters have been plastered on walls, set up by a neo-fascist student association that operates out of high schools and universities. As I travelled around Italy, their logo followed me too, but it was losing the battle for wall space against far-left graffiti and whoever this guy is. Italy is covered in graffiti, Rome especially, and much of it is political, and nearly all of it sucks. It plagued cities in Mussolini's day too. Sentences from his speeches were reproduced on walls of the city he ruled. Political slogans and logos fought for space on any brickwork that wasn't ancient enough to demand historical reverence, and so it goes today. When resistance to the regime began in the early 1940s, the first visible defiance that many citizens saw was on the walls. At a time when the secret police would arrest anyone who dared to print anything that was critical of the government, graffiti was one of the safest ways to be heard. Suddenly, these flashy propaganda posters that had worked so well for decades looked forced and inauthentic compared to the scribbles of ordinary people who were risking their lives to leave them. The legacy of fascism, though, was harder to erase than spray paint. When Mussolini was deposed, there were tens of thousands of Romans who had worked for the regime who took no part in the resistance. They didn't want to completely tear down the history they were instrumental in building, and that's part of the reason why you'll still see things like this, hiding behind the scaffolding, a statue still sporting the Roman salute in plain sight. And just around the corner from that is one of the only remaining images of Benito Mussolini in modern Italy, sitting on his horse, surrounded by soldiers in a military victory that never happened. Modern Italy's relationship with its former leader is complex and is currently in a state of flux. When she was younger, the current Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni expressed admiration for Mussolini, distancing herself from these views when she entered mainstream politics, but there is no denying that her policies and style of speech betray a direct influence.
Io sono Giorgia, sono una donna, sono una madre, sono italiana, sono cristiana, non me lo toglierete!
Fully fledged neo-fascist organisations might be in a small minority, but membership has been swelling in recent years. Still, they are mostly a mix of angry, nostalgic old men and rebellious students who are more interested in offending people than actually seeking political office. Maybe one reason for this resurgence is simply because of what remains standing. Statues stick around for a lot longer than the people who suffered during their construction. The March on Rome happened over 100 years ago. The rubble's been swept away. The bodies have been buried. But the best of the era's architecture remains standing in a city that proudly preserves its past.
Stuck on your next project? Let's fix that. Check out vecteezy.com, your secret weapon for thrilling designs, millions of vectors, stock images, and templates at your command. Start your next design mission for free. Sign up now for 7 days of unlimited downloads. Vecteezy.com, because deadlines wait for no one.
Designed like a supercar, built like a tank, to dominate the toughest lawns on Earth. Say hello to Luba Mini AWD, and sayonara to all that shaggy old grass. Luba laughs in the face of gravity. Steep slopes are child's play as it traverses rough terrain thanks to an all-wheel drive system, reactive suspension, and internal motors for maximum torque. One pass and it's game over for any grass, leaving a pristine cut in its wake. With the click of a button, Luba immediately builds a 2D layout of the area. Add eyes, and you've got a high-def 3D model of your yard. Doesn't get any smarter than that. Luba's vision system is like the brain behind the brawn. It scouts boundaries by itself, auto-generates a map of your yard, avoid the obstacles automatically, and keeps on working even in GPS dead zones without any effect to its boundary detection. Crazy kids? Dirty dogs? Not a problem. Luba detects any and all obstacles. It reroutes on the fly. No arguments, no drama, just non-stop mowing. Check out this set of omnidirectional wheels. They rip around sharp corners, no sweat. Taking 0 turns for breakfast. Channel your inner Picasso as Luba delivers lawn art fit for the Louvre. Under the hood, size definitely matters. Luba Mini AWD sports a huge cutting disc with 6 blades that shred grass like a hot knife through butter. Plus more space so nothing gets jammed. And those blades get real cozy along any boundary because your lawn deserves a clean finish right up to the edge. Adjust cutting height to your heart's desire. Plus, a swappable battery delivers industry-leading capacity for 3 hours of pure mowing muscle. Customize up to 15 different mowing zones. So Luba does what you want, when you want it. Even with all those bells and whistles, Luba purrs like a kitty, quiet as a mouse. So kick back, enjoy that extra free time, and bask in the glory of an immaculate cut every single time. Luba Mini AWD, built to dominate the toughest lawns.
Predapio is a small rural town in eastern Italy, home to just over 6,000 people, most of whom are old and unassuming. The place has a frankly menacing aura, mostly because its only claim to fame is being the hometown and final resting place of Benito Mussolini. Today, his childhood home is a minor tourist attraction. It was once an anonymous building on an anonymous hill, but in the 1930s, Mussolini commissioned the construction of this crown-like structure to serve as the new town square, positioning his birthplace as Predapio's sacred central jewel, burdening the quiet town with a legacy that it has never escaped. The imposing fascist party headquarters in the tiny town has been abandoned since the early 1940s. I tried to find a way in, but every possible entrance was locked or had rusted over decades ago. Its outer walls are covered in faded neo-fascist graffiti, left behind by Predapio's most enthusiastic tourists.
And is currently, might even be.
My fault. I forgot. I was helping my mom with like some USB connection issues, some Bluetooth shit. Okay. Oh, the camera's not even fucking on. Wait. Oh, everything's fucked up. This is what happens when you don't have your own fucking house, huh? Oh, here we go. Let's
Being
continue.
restored
I should have
after
finished this
years
shit
of
real
foot
quick.
traffic. The EUR district was meant to be Mussolini's masterpiece. Today, it hosts the headquarters of a few minor government departments and luxury fashion brands. It sits a few miles south of where most tourists ever venture, and on wet weekends is virtually deserted. It was originally built as the site of the 1942 World's Fair, doubling as a celebration of 20 years of fascist rule. But after the outbreak of World War II, the fair was scrapped, and Mussolini was deposed by his own Grand Council 1 year after it was supposed to occur. Today, the district feels like a ghost town, populated by the spirits of a Roman past that never was and a fascist future that never came to be. For me, though, it's a much more interesting place to visit compared to the overcrowded Colosseum or the spiritually vacant Vatican, sapped of all its supposed grandeur by the clatter of shuffling feet and telescopic selfie sticks.
Damn.
But I digress. The EUR district is more than just a window into Italy's fascist past, it is also an insight into its fascist present. Rows of posters have been plastered on walls, set up by a neo-fascist student association that operates out of high schools and universities. As I travelled around Italy, their logo followed me too, but it was losing the battle for wall space against far-left graffiti and whoever this guy is. Italy is covered in graffiti, Rome especially, and much of it is political, and nearly all of it sucks. It plagued cities in Mussolini's day too.
Drag that in. There's a lot of places.
Sentences from his speeches were reproduced on walls of the city he ruled. Political slogans and logos fought for space on any brickwork that wasn't ancient enough to demand historical reverence, and so it goes today. When resistance to the regime began in the early 1940s, the first visible defiance that many citizens saw was on the walls. At a time when the secret police would arrest anyone who dared to print anything that was critical of the government, graffiti was one of the safest ways to be heard. Suddenly, these flashy propaganda posters that had worked so well for decades looked forced and inauthentic compared to the scribbles of ordinary people who were risking their lives to leave them. The legacy of fascism, though, was harder to erase than spray paint. When Mussolini was deposed, there were tens of thousands of Romans who had worked for the regime who took no part in the resistance. They didn't want to completely tear down the history they were instrumental in building, and that's part of the reason why you'll still see things like this, hiding behind the scaffolding, a statue still sporting the Roman salute in plain sight. And just around the corner from that is one of the only remaining images of Benito Mussolini in modern Italy, sitting on his horse, surrounded by soldiers in a military victory that never happened. Modern Italy's relationship with its former leader is complex and is currently in a state of flux.
When she was younger, the current Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni expressed admiration for Mussolini,
distancing herself from these views when she entered mainstream politics, but there is no denying that her policies and style of speech betray a direct influence.
Io sono Giorgia, sono una donna, sono una madre, sono italiana, sono cristiana, non me lo toglierete!
Fully fledged neo-fascist organisations might be in a small minority, but membership has been swelling in recent years. Still, they are mostly a mix of angry, nostalgic old men and rebellious students who are more interested in offending people than actually seeking political office. Maybe one reason for this resurgence is simply because of what remains standing. Statues stick around for a lot longer than the people who suffered during their construction. The March on Rome happened over 100 years ago. The rubble's been swept away. The bodies have been buried. But the best of the era's architecture remains standing in a city that proudly preserves its past.
What a dork. Bunch of fucking dorks. Too much white. That's why I hate white people, bro. I'm becoming a self-hating white.
Verdapio is a small rural town in eastern Italy, home to just over 6,000 people, most of whom are old and unassuming. The place has a frankly menacing aura, mostly because its only claim to fame is being the hometown and final resting place of Benito Mussolini. Today, his childhood home is a minor tourist attraction. It was once an anonymous building on an anonymous hill, But in the 1930s, Mussolini commissioned the construction of this crown-like structure to serve as the new town square, positioning his birthplace as Prodapio's sacred central jewel, burdening the quiet town with a legacy that it has never escaped. The imposing fascist party headquarters in the tiny town has been abandoned since the early 1940s. I tried to find a way in, but every possible entrance was locked or had rusted over decades ago. Its outer walls are covered in faded neo-fascist graffiti, left behind by Prodapio's most enthusiastic tourists. Pilgrims mostly make their way here on Mussolini's birthday or for the March on Rome's anniversary. Enough of these guys make their way to Prodapio throughout the year to maintain a market for Mussolini-themed mugs, wine, dress watches, socks, and, troublingly, truncheons. Displayed proudly in shop fronts are enough tacky pieces of Mussolini merch to boggle the mind.
That's whack.
Basically, Prodapio is a forgotten fascist theme park, and I was visiting in its off-season.
Are you a hot sleeper? Do you find yourself waking up in the middle of the night, overheated and drenched?
During the peak of his power, Prodapio was visited by legions of loyal fascists, who came to pay their respect at his home and to the elaborate tomb housing the bodies of his parents. This rally occurred in 1937, and you can see his followers turned his birthplace into Bethlehem. Mussolini had just made good on his promise of imperial expansion, a promise that he'd been exciting crowds with since before he was even leader. Italy's invasion of Ethiopia then was a long time coming. It was a country that Italy had failed to invade in 1895, which was a bitter source of national shame. So Mussolini spent the early 1930s building up Italy's military and modernizing it at great cost. The invasion itself was short and marred by war crimes. Ethiopia's emperor fled, and the country surrendered, with casualties in the hundreds of thousands. Also, Italy could finally compete with other European nations as a real imperial power. But Italy's army suffered too, with some expensive, embarrassing equipment losses to boot.
When the Italian crew open their manholes for air, the Ethiopians, hiding in ambush, shoot them down. In this country, the heat inside a tank is sometimes nearly 200 degrees Fahrenheit.
The invasion of Ethiopia was in many ways just another grand propaganda campaign, providing the newsreels with footage of charging Italian cavalries and Italian fighter planes overhead. But it emptied the government's purse and gutted its ability to wage war against a major power. For Mussolini, image was everything. Often the performance of power was more important than power itself. But keeping Ethiopia under Italian rule came at even greater cost. The occupation required an enormous garrison of troops to stay put in Africa. Keeping them fed and supplied over a long distance stretched Italian supply lines to breaking point. So when the Ethiopians resisted their occupation, it led to brutal, disorganized crackdowns, mass executions, and the establishment of concentration camps. Britain and France publicly condemned the invasion, citing the use of mustard gas on civilians as barbaric.
Gross.
In reaction, Mussolini ordered Achille Strachey to produce endless reels of anti-French propaganda. But alienating Italy from the rest of the world forced Mussolini to develop closer ties with Germany's new leader, a man who, on first impression, Mussolini thought was a total psychopath.
As the German Chancellor steps from the machine, he is greeted by Signor Mussolini. This is the first occasion on which these two famous dictators have met. Each holds in his hand the destiny of a great nation, and the whole world looks with eager interest on this meeting. For any momentous decision made by either of these men must affect the whole of Europe, if not the world.
Adolf Hitler and Benito Mussolini first met in Venice in 1934, and Hitler was immediately in awe of the man he had respected so much from afar. Mussolini was less impressed. He had long resented Hitler's theft of the Roman salute and the other obvious ways that he sought to emulate him. Together, they were greeted by legions of loyal Mussolini followers and military displays which impressed the German leader greatly. But their private meeting only confirmed Mussolini's irritation. The palace where they met was plagued with mosquitoes that day, and Hitler spoke extremely quickly and without pause, jumping from topic to topic in a language that Mussolini only had a passing knowledge of.
In private conversations later on, Mussolini told associates that the Führer had all the mannerisms of a sexual degenerate. A bit rich, coming from a guy that apparently had up to 4 sexual encounters a day with different women.
The girlies were fighting, 2 fascists fighting. Fascist infighting happens quite often.
Women who claimed to be among Mussolini's mistresses confirmed that these were time-constrained affairs. I mean, he had a country to run. So Mussolini would satisfy himself in less than a minute, remaining clothed, only taking his obelisk out. By the time Mussolini visited Munich in 1937, he had been completely eclipsed by his former fanboy. His journey to Munich was a meticulously orchestrated state visit, designed to impress the founder of fascism by his own standards. Hitler's audiences weren't just adoring, they were captivated and loyal to the point of madness. Hitler's use of charged symbolism had reached the levels of religious worship. His troops were more disciplined, the technology far more advanced. This was fascism, but on a true industrial scale.
Oh, it's here!
The trip humbled Mussolini. He was aging, his health was ailing, now alienated from Western Europe with an economy and military capacity weakened by his Ethiopian campaign. From a tactical perspective, he had no choice but to fall in line with this new, stronger leader. In public, he now completely abandoned any initial irritation he had with the Führer. Ultimately, the founder of fascism himself was susceptible to the same spell that he put his country under. Confronted with the discipline, fanaticism, and efficient war machine of Nazi Germany, Mussolini went from Il Duce to the Führer's lapdog. In 1938,
El douchebag.
Just before the outbreak of World War II, Mussolini instituted anti-Jewish racial laws in Italy at Hitler's insistence, forcing his former mistress and biographer to flee the country she'd helped create, leaving her sister and brother-in-law behind, who were deported to
leopards
Auschwitz
ate your
and
face.
executed. Milan Central Station is, without argument, the greatest architectural masterpiece of the fascist era. But its greatest shame also occurred beneath its vaulted ceilings. Hidden away on the far side of Platform 21, you'll find one of the only surviving images of Mussolini in Milan, depicted here in another scene that never happened. You'll notice, though, that his eyes have been removed, rumoured to have been shot away by partisans when they finally liberated the city from fascist rule. On hidden platforms beneath the surface of the train station, thousands of Italian citizens were loaded onto trains and transported to Nazi death camps outside the country, all under the watchful eyes of their leader.
Dell'impero e del regno da Baria. Ascoltate, la dichiarazione di guerra è già stata consegnata agli ambasciatori.
Mussolini's declaration of war was as tactical and well-judged as Italy's entire World War II campaign, which is to say, it was crap. In his usual theatrical style, he declared war on Britain and France, just as France was already collapsing under the German invasion.
La tua tenacia! Il tuo coraggio! Il tuo valore!
After commissioning years of anti-French propaganda, Mussolini couldn't pass up the opportunity of putting France to heel. Hitler, though, was furious and confused. He knew just how poorly prepared Italy was to enter the war. But also, he didn't understand why Mussolini would publicly declare war before invading. He ended up paying the price for these theatrics. Italian troops encountered a prepared resistance in terrible weather conditions and lost thousands of men in just 5 days. Their lives were exchanged for the symbolic occupation of Menton, a French Riviera resort town of little to no strategic value. The only prize it offered was footage for the propaganda reels, with its abandoned casinos and the capture of its scenic coastline serving as proof of Italy's meagre but costly triumph. The Italian military didn't fare any better as the war went on, serving more as a liability to the Axis forces than a competent ally. The Italian invasion of Greece was a disaster. Mussolini launched the invasion without informing Hitler. Learning his lesson from the last time, he didn't announce it to anyone else either. He believed it would be an easy victory, independent of German assistance. On arrival, though, they encountered a well-trained and more than motivated resistance.
The Greeks advanced to harass the Italians in their precarious positions. At the eastern end of the line, the frozen skeletons of Italian aircraft litter the countryside, tribute to the gallant Greek Air Force and our own brave flyers. As in Libya, so in Albania, stores and equipment in huge quantities are left behind in the Great Retreat.
The Greeks
they got
easily
fucked up.
outmaneuvered Italy and pushed them back into occupied Albania.
In the wild and rugged country of southern Albania, the Greeks are still pushing steadily forward after the retreating Italians. Ancient stone bridges destroyed by the fleeing Wops are replaced by wooden structures by Greek engineers.
Forcing Hitler to delay his invasion of the Soviet Union and bail out the Italians.
Get
instead.
fucked, you dumb fucks.
Many World War II
You
historians
dumb
point to
fucking
this moment
fascists.
as maybe the turning point in the whole war. Had Germany invaded the Soviet Union sooner, they may have avoided the bitter Russian winter that halted the Nazi war machine in its tracks. The images all over Italy depicting Mussolini as a conquering hero now looked unintentionally ironic. The shameless proliferation of his own face was now actively working against him. Who was responsible for Italy's military failure? There was an answer on every street corner.
On the left of the screen has struck the center tank. It spins around, disabled.
Italy's campaign in North Africa went just as poorly. Incompetent and increasingly unwilling Italian generals floundered against better equipped British forces.
There it goes.
Italy advanced into Egypt without securing supply lines, allowing the faster, more mechanized British army to capture Italian troops with little effort. When the Germans arrived to bail Italy out again, it was even more humiliating. From this point forward, Italian troops were largely under German command, where they were seen for the liability that they were. When word got back from the Eastern Front, the Italian people learnt that their troops were being treated like expendable inferiors by Hitler's forces. The war had brought them no pride or glory. All Mussolini had done was turn their sons into slaves and cannon fodder in the service of a foreign army.
Damn, he fucked them up.
His days were numbered. Mussolini was also distracted by his own rapidly deteriorating health. The stomach pains that had plagued him since his time in the army increased in both frequency and severity. He attempted to hide this from his lackeys, but between meetings he would writhe on his office floor in agony. As the war went on, he avoided public appearances, and when he did appear, his speeches were sapped of the vitality that once characterized them. How could he pretend to be Italy's supreme leader when he was so clearly under the Führer's thumb? How could he pretend to be a man of providence ordained by God when Italy's war efforts had all been calamitous failures? And how could he keep the strong man act up when his body was so clearly failing him? With Allied bombing raids reducing sacred parts of the Italian capital to rubble, the writing was on the wall. Italy no longer had any appetite for war, and high-ranking fascist officials agreed. Members of the Grand Council, led by his foreign minister and his own son-in-law, conspired to depose him, while military figures simultaneously held talks with the king to have him officially dismissed. These plots culminated in a long recrimination session in the Grand Council, where Mussolini was confronted by the plotters. He endured their speeches, mostly in silence, trying to hide obvious signs of stomach pain. Once his former lackeys had said their piece, he was taken away secretly in an ambulance and imprisoned, moved between several secret locations over the course of about 2 months. By all accounts, his jailers treated him quite well. He was described as calm and accommodating, seemingly at peace with his downfall, wondering aloud to anyone who'd listen about how history would eventually redeem his overall legacy. And history, or at least Italian history, probably would remember him more charitably if it weren't for what happened next. Italy does 3 things better than any country on earth: coffee, hand gestures, and graveyards. Catholic guilt has inspired some of the world's best art and architecture, and it has also apparently moved the entire Italian population to house their formerly alive family members in fabulous style. Italian graveyards are enormous and unnerving, as they're the only ones I've been to where the dead stare back at you. But on the outskirts of Prodapio, you'll find an especially disturbing boneyard, as everyone here is buried according to the symmetrical vision of its most famous corpse.
Mussolini.
The remains of Benito Mussolini are an inconvenient hike from Prodapio's town centre, but they are still probably the town's best tourist attraction. His crypt was recently renovated and reopened to the public, where it has attracted the usual crowd of Mussolini fanboys, who crowd the cemetery on his birthday, queuing up to show their respects with a salute. On any other day, though, you can descend the stairs by yourself and enjoy the spooky scenery without having to endure the stench of still living fascists. Well, not quite, as the crypt is guarded by a single neo-fascist volunteer at all times, who watched me and my camera like a hawk.
Oh
The only
my
way I could have gotten a
God.
colder reception is if I'd shown up with a shovel and a sex toy. The crypt itself is cramped with Mussolinis, with his parents, siblings, and a few children kept in opposing corners. But as in life, Benito himself takes centre stage, draped in the Italian flag and watched over by his own marble head. Trekking across the Italian countryside to stand before the body of Italy's most infamous citizen was a surreal experience, but his own journey to get here was even stranger.
The Allied invasion of the Italian mainland commenced. It was to prove the shortest invasion in history. For on that same day came the Italian capitulation and acceptance of the Casablanca terms of surrender.
As soon as the Italian government officially defected to the side of the Allies, German forces quickly occupied strategic areas in the country's north, forcing the king and the new prime minister to flee south, effectively cutting the country in two. Mussolini, though, was still nowhere to be found, but with the help of some spies and a few bribes, the Führer's forces found him.
Oh shit, did they kill him?
On September 12, 1943,
Oh, to
a crack
rescue.
team of German commandos conducted a glider assault on a remote hotel located on the tallest mountain in central Italy. They immediately overwhelmed the 200 Italian guards and secured their valuable prisoner. Mussolini was photographed upon his rescue, or kidnapping, depending on how you see it, and he was then transported into one of the overloaded gliders, and after 2 days of travel, met Adolf Hitler at his Eastern Front headquarters.
Hitler's boyfriend, the deflated Mussolini, was carted off to Germany by plane following his rescue by Nazi paratroops.
At this time, Hitler was already effectively losing the war. And he was also in the throes of a pretty gnarly methamphetamine addiction, thanks to his doctor, who was just loading him up with the stuff. Crazy times. Great book, Blitz, if you ever get a chance to read it. Anyway, yeah, Hitler's mental faculties were probably shot at this point, so his decision to reinstate the Duce in a new North Italian Nazi puppet state, maybe you could blame that on the meth. The Italian Social Republic was a joke, window dressing for the German occupation. The Allies supported the southern kingdom of Italy, which eventually absorbed Rome and the shambolic remnants of the government Mussolini left behind. The hardcore fascists migrated north, taking their place alongside the man they still worshipped. Achille Starace was among them, but was so wildly unpopular as the face of fascist propaganda that he was forced to keep a low profile in Milan. Mussolini's son-in-law, who had been instrumental in the plot to overthrow him, tried to flee to Spain, but was captured and taken into fascist custody. At Hitler's insistence, Mussolini had him executed by firing squad, alongside several other high-ranking traitors who had served alongside him for decades.
Cadono Marinelli, Gottardi, Pareschi, De Bono, Giano.
This alienated him from his daughter, who had begged for her husband's life, and sent Mussolini into a deep depression. He later recounted that upon hearing the shots being fired, he felt like he'd died himself. With the Germans in charge and his health in stark decline, Mussolini had little else to do other than ponder his place in history. This did give him enough time, though, to write a follow-up to his highly successful autobiography. In a series of articles that became a single volume, he charts his own downfall, something that most dictators don't get a chance to do. And as a result, it's a weird read, full of delusional self-aggrandizement, but also a barely concealed sense of doom. He saves his most bitter recriminations for the king and the various traitors who orchestrated his downfall. But he also blames the Italian people themselves for not sticking with fascism when the going got tough. He writes that history will vindicate him and that a return to power was possible, but in private, he knew he was a dead man walking. For nearly another 2 years, Italy was plunged into a brutal civil war. Supported by the SS, Mussolini's forces waged an unforgiving campaign against the partisans and civilians that rejected his legitimacy. The man who promised Italian expansion and national glory was now responsible for tearing the country in two, and for standing by as a foreign army exterminated her citizens. This is Piazzale Loreto, an ugly, unremarkable urban island in central Milan, crowded by congestion and shaded by crappy corporate high-rises. The only reason anyone would come here is to get somewhere else, unless, of course, you know its history. This monument, sat between two roads on a poorly maintained patch of grass, was commissioned to commemorate 15 Italian resistance fighters. They had been prisoners, hand-picked by Milan's Gestapo, who were then taken here and shot dead as a warning to others. Their bodies were left to rot in the blistering August heat, next to signs that labelled them murderers. For the rest of the day, armed guards paraded commuters past the bodies, a piece of morbid theatre that Milan wouldn't forget, or forgive. Less than a year later, Milan was a battlefield. A few electrical poles in the city centre still display holes from the bullets and shrapnel. The Allies and partisans fought the few remaining fascists and liberated the city through intense urban combat. After victory was achieved, partisans rounded up any officials still loyal to the regime. Despite no longer holding any kind of power, Achille Starace was recognised as an infamous and ugly reminder of the old regime and was arrested. He was taken into custody on April 28th, but didn't stay there long, as the next day his captors told him they were going to take him to meet Mussolini. Driven through a city in celebration, Starace was escorted to the Piazzale Loreto. Pushed through a growing, heaving crowd at gunpoint, he was taken to the exact location where the partisans had been displayed and left to rot just a year before. Here's where he saw Mussolini for the last time. Beaten beyond recognition, his skull had been crushed by the angry feet of the crowd, strung up by his feet, and displayed alongside the body of his mistress and several high-ranking officials. He had been captured the previous day, attempting to flee to Switzerland dressed as a German soldier. But once he was captured, a partisan executioner was sent to find him with the sole task of conducting a summary execution. If we judged him only by his final words, Mussolini's end could be seen as somewhat dignified. He opened his shirt and told his executioner to aim for his heart. But his actions spoke louder, as he did nothing to prevent Clara, his mistress, from jumping in the way of the first bullet meant for him. Their bodies were then driven south to Milan and dumped on the dirt, or forgive. Less than a year later, Milan was a battlefield. A few blitzed, if you ever get a chance to read it. Anyway, yeah, Hitler's mental faculties were probably shot at this point, so his decision to reinstate the Duce in a new North Italian Nazi puppet state, maybe you could blame that on the meth. The Italian Social Republic was a joke, window dressing for the German occupation. The Allies supported the southern kingdom of Italy, which eventually absorbed Rome and the shambolic remnants of the government Mussolini left behind. The hardcore fascists migrated north, taking their place alongside the man they still worshipped. Achille Starace was among them, but was so wildly unpopular as the face of fascist propaganda that he was forced to keep a low profile in Milan. Mussolini's son-in-law, who had been instrumental in the plot to overthrow him, tried to flee to Spain, but was captured and taken into fascist custody. At Hitler's insistence, Mussolini had him executed by firing squad, alongside several other high-ranking traitors who had served alongside him for decades.
Damn.
This alienated him from his daughter, who had begged for her husband's life, and sent Mussolini into a deep depression. He later recounted that upon hearing the shots being fired, he felt like he had died himself. With the Germans in charge and his health in stark decline, Mussolini had little else to do other than ponder his place in history. This did give him enough time, though, to write a follow-up to his highly successful autobiography. In a series of articles that became a single volume, he charts his own downfall, something that most dictators don't get a chance to do. And as a result, it's a weird read, full of delusional self-aggrandizement, but also a barely concealed sense of doom. He saves his most bitter recriminations for the king and the various traitors who orchestrated his downfall. But he also blames the Italian people themselves for not sticking with fascism when the going got tough. He writes that history will vindicate him and that a return to power was possible, but in private, he knew he was a dead man walking.
Co-producer is gonna give you unique
Get
sounds that
fucked.
actually fits your track in seconds. Let me show you. First, let it listen.
For nearly another 2 years, Italy was plunged into a brutal civil war. Supported by the SS, Mussolini's forces waged an unforgiving campaign against the partisans and civilians that rejected his legitimacy. The man who promised Italian expansion and national glory was now responsible for tearing the country in two, and for standing by as a foreign army exterminated her citizens. This is Piazzale Loreto, an ugly, unremarkable urban island in central Milan, crowded by congestion and shaded by crappy corporate high-rises. The only reason anyone would come here is to get somewhere else, unless, of course, you know its history. This monument, sat between two roads on a poorly maintained patch of grass, was commissioned to commemorate 15 Italian resistance fighters. They had been prisoners, hand-picked by Milan's Gestapo, who were then taken here and shot dead as a warning to others. Their bodies were left to rot in the blistering August heat, next to signs that labelled them murderers. For the rest of the day, armed guards paraded commuters past the bodies, a piece of morbid theatre that Milan wouldn't forget or forgive. Less than a year later, Milan was a battlefield. A few electrical poles in the city centre still display holes from the bullets and shrapnel. The Allies and partisans fought the few remaining fascists and liberated the city through intense urban combat. After victory was achieved, partisans rounded up any officials still loyal to the regime. Despite no longer holding any kind of power, Achille Starace was recognised as an infamous and ugly reminder of the old regime and was arrested. He was taken into custody on April 28th, but didn't stay there long, as the next day his captors told him they were going to take him to meet Mussolini. Driven through a city in celebration, Starace was escorted to the Piazzale Loreto. Pushed through a growing, heaving crowd at gunpoint, he was taken to the exact location where the partisans had been displayed and left to rot just a year before. Here's where he saw Mussolini for the last time. Beaten beyond recognition, his skull had been crushed by the angry feet of the crowd, strung up by his feet, and displayed alongside the body of his mistress and several high-ranking officials. He had been captured the previous day, attempting to flee to Switzerland dressed as a German soldier. But once he was captured, a partisan executioner was sent to find him with the sole task of conducting a summary execution. If we judged him only by his final words, Mussolini's end could be seen as somewhat dignified. He opened his shirt and told his executioner to aim for his heart. But his actions spoke louder, as he did nothing to prevent Clara, his mistress, from jumping in the way of the first bullet meant for him. Their bodies were then driven south to Milan and dumped on the dirt, only strung up after the crowd had taken their revenge. In the shadow of his Duce's swinging body, Starace gave him a final salute, the same salute that he had forced on a nation, and then was shot in the back of the head and strung up alongside him. There is no plaque or any form of commemoration in place where Mussolini's body was famously put on display, though he might be happy to know there is still a giant M standing close to the exact spot. The petrol station is long gone. In its place is a 2-story McDonald's, where you can commemorate Mussolini getting curb-stomped with a 9-piece nugget meal. Initially, Mussolini was buried in a mass grave on the outskirts of the city, but a whole year later, nostalgic loyalists dug him up on Easter Sunday.
Of course.
They then moved the body from place to place, trying to avoid detection. When authorities eventually tracked him and the grave robbers down, the government entrusted the remains with a convent 12 miles north of Milan. His body was then secretly stashed in a closet for another 11 years. It wasn't until 1957 when the body's relocation to the family crypt was finally approved, and here he has been displayed ever since. History is a sequence of eternal returns. The phases in the lives of nations are measured in terms of decades, sometimes of centuries. These are the words that Mussolini decided to close his autobiography with. And they are the words of an egomaniac consoling himself with the possibility that history might still remember him favourably. But they are also the words of a man who had a profound understanding of human nature. He knew that societies had short memories, and that the same primal feelings he exploited in his journey towards power would outlive him, and that others would follow.
That's fascism, baby. Not
There's
good.
a case to be made that everything built by evil regimes should be torn down, but I don't think that case is strong enough. It's important to remember atrocities, of course, but it's equally important to remember that evil people can build beautiful things. Tyrants are cheered when they burn down the old order, because crowds were seduced by their image, strength, and stories. Benito Mussolini was a fascinating character that history cannot afford to forget.
There we go. Wow. That was awesome, bro.
Really important to remember cheered when they burned down the old order, because
I want to watch sí. Déjala ahí, yo la cojo. All right, y'all. Peace. I want to watch this other one here, how to do a coup in any country, later, some other day. But yeah, that was it for today. All right, y'all. See you later.